right, Exodus chapter number 7 this morning. We're going to get in some interesting things here. We dealt with the setting up of the Levitical priesthood last week in chapter number 6, verses 13 through 30. God's setting something up that he's going to take care of on Mount Sinai as he sets up the tabernacle in the wilderness. He'll set up the priesthood, get everything in order. We're going down through Exodus. We're going to get into a lot of things, especially into the tabernacle of the wilderness. Pardon me, I got a frog in my throat this morning. In verse number 30 of chapter 6 again, and Moses said before the Lord, Behold, I am of uncircumcised lips, and how shall Pharaoh hearken unto me? That's 3 strikes and you're out. That's 3 times he did that. You go back to Acts chapter number 7, the Bible said that he was a man mighty in word and deed. He never had a problem speaking before, but now all of a sudden you find a lack of self-confidence. I don't think he's just trying to excuse himself. He's just simply saying, I don't think Pharaoh's going to listen to me. I don't think he's going to pay any attention to me. I don't think that he's going to do that. So he complains again, but notice what God said to him in verse number 7, the word and. That means we're still dealing with verse number 30. And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. I want to look at Egypt just for a moment. They were a polytheistic nation. They worshipped everything from frogs to the Nile to the sun god Amun-Ra. They just, like a lot of these heathen nations, and that's what Egypt is. It's a heathen nation. Now their main god is Muhammad. Allah, and Muhammad's his prophet, they'll tell you, but at the same time, they were polytheistic. They worshipped all, kind of like India today. In India, they worship cows, they worship white elephants, rats. Can't kill a rat because it may be your great-grandmother. She's been reincarnated back as a rat. And got out of silliness. Listen, when you ignore God, then you get into a bunch of foolishness at that point in time. And Egypt had their time in the sun. When Joseph was there for 110 years, or basically 110 minus 17, so he was there for 93 years in Egypt. They saw the influence of God in a young man's life. You remember Potiphar saw that his God, God was all over that young man. He put him over his house. He prospered. The jailer saw God all over that young man. Put him over the jail. Pharaoh saw God all over the man and put him as second in command. And then he was in such a position until he was 110 years old. They had their time. They understood who Jehovah God was, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. They understood. But at the same time, they kept their gods. I don't see in the times of Moses or even back to Joseph where they ever got rid of their gods. They were polytheistic. If you do any studying about them, the spade of archaeology digs up a lot of things over there. You're able to read about these early Egyptians. And normally they take you back to the time of the pyramids. Again, let me talk about just for a second, when you get into history, what they use today is what they call carbon dating. They use several different ways in order to kind of try to look back and find the antiquity or the age of things. If I remember right, the half-life of radium is about 1,400 years, something of that nature. That means if you've got a pound of radium in 1,400 years, you've got a half pound of radium. In another 1,400 years, you've got, it just keeps going down. It doesn't go away, basically. But we find when they carbon date going back, when they get back to 2500 BC, now, a lot of times they're honest with this. Everything goes into the fog. They can't find writings that go back past that. the hieroglyphics and all the things that they used over in that area, they can't find that. So what they do, when they get to carbon dating, they go back to the age of the pyramids. They can go back to the age of Moses. They can go back probably into Abraham's day. But at the same time, the oldest books of the Bible were not written by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Pentateuch of the Bible. He wrote those in his lifetime. So what we have doesn't go back that far. But as far as you go back with the Egyptians, you get into polytheism. Poly, meaning, it just simply means many. Theism is God, or a study of God, or knowledge of God. So they're polytheistic. So what he did, God just simply said, hey, they like their gods, I'm going to make you a god to them. You're going to do things that only a God could do, and they're going to watch you, and Aaron's going to be your prophet. Every God needs a prophet, right? Somebody to speak for him. So he said, I'm going to make you a god, and Aaron's going to be your prophet. Now, thou shalt speak all that I command thee, in verse number 2. I want to say that the best case scenario for Egypt and for Pharaoh would have been for him to listen to God. But over in chapter number 5 and verse number 1, let me just read you what he said again. Afterward, Moses said, let my people go. But in verse number 2, Pharaoh said, who's the Lord? Who is this God? All right, just simply another God to him, a God that you can make an image to, set it up in your house, or do whatever you want. He said, who's the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? He said, I know not the Lord. I don't know this God of yours. I think that's an indictment upon Israel. Again, they spent 430 years in Egypt. 350 years of those they prospered. They did great, but all of a sudden these pharaohs are being raised up, don't know the God. That tells me they got materialistic. You have a problem with doing that. As they prospered and they got more land, more goods, more grain, more money, more position, prominence in Egypt, they kind of let God slide a little bit. Why? Because you have need of nothing. And that's what happens today with Laodicean church. So the best case scenario for Pharaoh would, he said, yeah, I know that God. I remember, I've heard about Joseph. I've heard about what God did. I'm just going to go ahead. Listen, I don't want to mess with your God. He's powerful. We're going to let you go. He said, who's the Lord? He said, I don't know this God, so I'm not going to obey his voice. So what happens is, in verse number 2, he's going to start reaping some consequences. I made a statement the other day. I heard a young man say that law without consequences is simply advice. If you've got laws in the United States, and we've got those, if there's no consequence that goes with breaking that law, then all you're doing is giving advice. It'd be better if you didn't do this, but if you do this, you're not going to pay a consequence. Now, I don't want to get in politics, but consequences seem to be just for certain people in our day. Prosecutorial, I forget, I'm trying to think of that legal name. Just simply, they prosecute who, prosecutorial discretion, I think it is. You know, you have what's called professional courtesy. If a deputy sheriff or a state trooper is out of state, he's traveling, he's going down the road, he runs 100 mile an hour in a 70 mile an hour speed zone, and another state trooper pulls him over and says, let me see your license. He just opens his billfold and flashes that badge. And normally the man says, well, just slow down and be careful now. Now, if you're running 100 mile an hour in a 70, you're 30 mile an hour over. What's that mean? That means you have a good possibility you're going to lose most of the points, if not your driver's license over. Well, what happens is now there's going to be consequences because what God says is law. God means what God says. God says what God means. Now, the Lord said, thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of his land. Now he's already told Moses that, listen, Pharaoh's not going to listen to you. He's not going to do it. He's already told him. He told him up on Mount Sinai. He said he's not going to let the people go. If you go to chapter number 9, 10, and 11, again, the book of Romans, or what's called theologically a parenthetical, he deals, if you take the book of Romans, it actually sets up a court scene. You find the law, God gives it. You find the reprobates in chapter number 1. Chapter number 2, you find that Israel comes underneath that law. Chapter number 3, you find that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Chapter number 4, you find that justification came by Abraham through faith. Chapter number 5, what it does, it just sets up a courtroom scene. What God's going to do, listen, God's law's got consequences, and he's getting ready to find out something. You mess with the judge if you want to. Now, if they took me, if I got a ticket or whatever, I'd pay that thing up front if I had to go in front of that judge. That's the last thing I want to do is make an enemy out of that judge. You go up there and spit in his face and scuff up his shoes and everything if you want to do that. I'm not personally going to go in there and do that. I'm not going to mess with that judge because he can, through his discretion, he can prosecute to whatever degree he wants. He can give you a max or he can give you a minimum. He can give you anything in between, or he can make it go away. He can reduce that charge and make that thing go away. Now, what he's going to find out here is God is commanding him to turn him loose. Now, in verses 3 and 4, we're going to find out something again. Look at verse 3. I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Now, I said, going back to chapter 9, 10, and 11 of the book of Romans, or what's called a parenthetical, they deal with the nation of Israel. Each one of these chapters starts with the nation of Israel and ends with the nation of Israel. And if you take anything out of that context and make it individual, you're going to mess up. And that's why Calvinism tries to find its strong points in chapter number 9 when he dealt with Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated. God did not hate that baby Esau when he had neither done good nor bad. Calvinism is a very wicked, ungodly doctrine. One, it shows that God is a respecter of persons. The Bible is very clear that God is no respecter of persons. He doesn't think more of me than he does you, doesn't think more of you than he does somebody else. God doesn't think anymore. You need to understand, God puts everybody on that big equal plane out here. So what happens is, you find in there that chapter 9, that he raised up Pharaoh to show his power in him. That tells me that Pharaoh was already a hard-hearted reprobate. God said basically that nothing that I do is going to shake him. That's what he told him at Mount Sinai. He didn't say, well, if I put enough pressure on him, he might relent. He said he's not going to let him go, folks. It doesn't matter what I do until I get down to where I'm going to take the firstborn out. He's not going to let them go. So we find here that as Pharaoh has hardened his heart, God makes it harder. I believe there comes a time in your life when your heart can be as adamant as stone. Nothing can penetrate it, nothing can break it. I've seen people that, listen, they don't care. They don't care about God. They don't care about heaven. They don't care about hell. They don't care about Jesus Christ. They don't care about you. They care about self. And it's all about self at that point. We're finding here that now God is hardening that thing. Used to years ago, and a lot of you may have done this, we would take a boiled egg and take it out of the shell and drop it in alcohol. Anybody ever done that? You can make a rubber egg out of it. That thing will be just like rubber after a while. That alcohol penetrates that, and it makes it more like rubber. I mean, you can just throw it and bounce it off of the wall if you want to. Well, what happens with sin is we harden ourselves through that boiling process. Okay, that egg is already hardened. I mean, the yellow doesn't run, the white doesn't run. You take it out of the shell, you can still kind of tear it apart a little bit and get to the center of it, but after a while, that hardening process makes it adamant as stone. Now, that's what God is going to do to Pharaoh. He said, you harden your heart. He hardened his heart before he ever came to the throne. How can you treat people the way he treated people and have any conscience about you at all? He had no conscience. That conscience seared with a hot iron. Now, notice what he said, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. Now, somebody said we add and subtract. God multiplies and divides. God said I'm going to multiply. What's that mean? That means I'm going to start you out at 2. Tomorrow it'll be 4. Tomorrow it'll be 16. Hey, I'm going to multiply this all the way up and down. I'm going to multiply what I'm going to do to you. We used to play this little game. Would you pay me a penny a day for 30 days? Let me work for you 30 days. You pay me the penny the first day, and then you double my salary every day for 30 days. That means you work today for a penny, tomorrow 2 pennies, next day for 4, next day 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. You start going through there. Man, by the end of the week, you got about $4 or $5 in your pocket. You're a quarter of the way through that month. You will be a millionaire after 30 days. That's multiplication. Now, what God's telling him here is I am going to increase that signs and wonders to the point that where he will have to do what I tell him, even with an adamant heart. That's what he's talking about here. He said, I'm going to multiply. They'll start out gentle, and we're going to start out gentle with them. Pharaoh was raised up for that purpose, but I thank God that he wanted all men to be saved. But look at verse number 4. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and bring forth mine armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. Now, God said, I'm going to do something. One, I'm going to do something with Egypt. What are you going to do? He said, I'm going to lay my hands on Egypt. Don't ever get in an argument with God. You're not going to win. I mean, don't tell God I'm not going to. It's kind of like a child. Hey, I hate to see it. You tell a child no, and they look at you and they say no. You say, what is that? That's called an automatic. I will bust them until I get their attention at that point in time. I'll spank them. I'll tell them the same thing. If they rebel, I'll pull them right back up, spank them again. And I always tell my children I can last a whole lot longer than you can. And I can raise the stakes in that game if I need to do it. If you don't get a hold of children when they're small, when they get to be teenagers, they'll run your house and they'll ruin your house. One thing we always did, and we loved our kids and did things with them, we controlled our children when they were in our home. We controlled them. They did what they were told when they were told. They didn't argue with us. Never had any problem with them. Didn't have a problem with them going to church, serving the Lord, doing anything else while they were in that home. And what he's saying is, I'm going to lay my hands on him. Look what he said, and bring forth mine armies. That's interesting. Israel has never had an army. An army is used for several things. One, it's used for self-protection. God gives people the right of self-protection. I want to deal with this just for a second, because the world has stolen a lot of things from us. One thing they have stolen from us is the Second Amendment. You have not only the right to keep arms, you have the constitutional right to bear arms. That means openly or concealed or any way you want to carry. You can carry an M60 machine gun strapped on your back if you want to, according to the Constitution. Why was it put that way? As a last result, that you could actually overthrow your own nation. You know, an armed populace cannot be controlled. And even in the Bible, you have a right to self-protection. The Lord said, if you don't have a sword, He said, you go sell your coat and buy one, and you can't spare it. They protected themselves. Now, it's one, for protection, but two, it is in order to take over the land of Canaan. A disorganized mob going into Canaan land wouldn't have lasted until the water got hot. You know, we almost lost the Revolutionary War. Our Minutemen, so to speak, these disorganized patriots who got their squirrel rifle and they could not stand before a well-trained military army. And that's what Great Britain was. These men were well-trained in the art of war. They knew how to fight. They were not afraid to fight. The Continental Army they'd fight them and then they'd break and run. They'd just run out. One of the best things that ever happened to the Continental Army was a place called Valley Forge. Valley Forge, they about froze to death and starved to death, but it gave them time to train an army in the art of warfare. And for the first time, the Continental troops began to stand up to the Egyptian troops, and the rest of it's history, all right? For the first time, you see armies. Why? Heretofore, they never needed this. They didn't need armies down in Egypt. They gave them the best of the land. They put them in there, let them eat all they wanted. Oh, they were prosperous and everything else. But He said, when you come out, I brought you out to what? Take you in, right? God didn't bring them out for them to die in the wilderness. God brought them out to take them into Canaan and to give them the land, but they were going to fight for it. So for the first time, you find Israel has armies. That word armies is plural. You go down through these 12 tribes, each one of these 12 tribes was an army to itself with thousands of well-qualified men to fight. As a matter of fact, if you get into the book of Numbers, boy, it numbers these. It tells you they had 78,000 in one of them. These men were not of double heart. They could keep rank. These men knew how to fight. So what He's going to do, He said, I'm going to bring forth armies. You're going to train armies. And then He said, and my people, the children of Israel, that's the people other than the armies. What are armies there for? To protect people. We have a standing military that, by the way, no country on the face of this earth wants to stand face to face with our military. Russia or China included. They do not want to stand face to face with the American military. We have, even though it may not be the largest army in the world, we have the most well-equipped army military on the face of this earth. Boy, they showed old Saddam Hussein. He was talking about the mother of battles that was going to take place over there. You know, when they came out of Kuwait and went into Iraq. Let me tell you something. He had the fourth largest standing army in the world at that time. Saddam Hussein had that large of an army. He had tanks. He had everything else. They just cleaned his plow. Now, I mean, they took him out so fast. Schwarzkopf, who was our military, they asked him, they said, how many men did you actually kill in that Iraqi army? He said, well, let's just put it this way. He said they had 500,000 on the battlefield. He said we took 80,000 prisoners and 80,000 went home. That's 300 and something thousand they buried in the sands of that. Hey, let me tell you, now they're going to bring out an army because they're bringing out people. These people have to be protected once they get them out. So He's doing something with Pharaoh, and He's going to do something with Israel, and out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. Now look at verse number 5. Verse number 5, He said, and the Egyptians shall know. And when I get done with them, they're going to know something. Hey, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. They'll know who he is, but they still will not accept him for who he is and what he is. When they come out of Egypt, Egypt remains in the same polytheistic condition it was when Israel, even with God showing those signs, they never changed. Now, you need to understand some Egyptians came out with them. The Bible said when they came out with a mixed multitude. So you find some Egyptian believers that actually came out in the Exodus along with Israel. You had a mixed multitude that came out, and we would call them Jewish proselytes. I dealt with the third temple in Revelation last Sunday night, built up, and it talks about the outer court. You had the outer court was actually the court of the Gentiles, then you had the court of the women, the court of Israel, then you had the holy place, and then you had the Holy of Holies. You had a different setup there, but that last was for the proselytes, the Jewish proselytes. That's why when you go to the book of Acts, when they spoke in tongues as God gave them utterance, that was not Oscar Lashanda, got a Yamaha, one Honda. That was languages. He actually mentioned 16 different languages where every man heard in their own language. Why? This was Pentecost. It's one of the feast days that all Jewish men had to come to. There were 3 feast days that no matter where you was, you had to come to Jerusalem, and Pentecost was one of those. So they have Jewish proselytes, Gentiles from all over the place who had believed on the Messiah to come. They had come to know the Lord in that way, and when they came, they were there. So now notice what he said. He said in verse number 5, he said, I'm going to bring them out. They'll know who I am. I'll stretch forth my hand with Egypt. There's going to be a mixed multitude come out and bring out the children of Israel from among them. Now, I like among them. Israel was not separate. Now, let's go back to the beginnings. When they went down to Egypt under Jacob, they put them in the land of what? Goshen. They were separated. But they had lost their separation, and now I'm sure Goshen was probably the main homestead of the Jews in all this time. Very prosperous place. I don't see why they would want to leave it. But you find that there's been an intertanglement of Jews and Gentiles in here. So he uses the word, I'm not going to bring them out of Egypt. He used the terminology, I'm going to bring them out from among them. Verse 6, and Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. So they became obedient to it. Now, it gives the ages here, verse number 7. Moses was 80 years old. We understand that from previous, that he was 80 years old, but now it gives Aaron, he was 83 years old when they spake unto Pharaoh. So again, Miriam was the oldest child. She looked over Moses when he was put in the ark, put in the bulrushes. I'm glad they didn't put the ark in the river. People think they just put it in the river and it floated down. No, they put it among the bulrushes where it couldn't float. They kept it out of the current. They didn't want it to go down the Nile, into the Nile Delta, out into the Mediterranean Sea, and God knows where Moses would have ended up after that. They put it in the bulrushes. We call these things cattails. Anybody ever seen cattails in ponds and stuff? They grow thick. Got the big old cattail. We used to you can use those things as torches. You can take them, dip them in a little coal oil, and you can light them things up. Boy, you got your little torch going. We used to take those cattails and use them. What it did, he hid him there, but Miriam was the one that watched him until Pharaoh's daughter got him. Then she said, hey, you want me to go get a nurse? And brought Mama. Now, notice what he said. Then Aaron was the next born. These were all children of Levi. And then Moses was actually the youngest, but God is elevating the youngest over the oldest. Once again, you find the birth order changed and turned around. They were still in the time of the patriarchs at this time, so they had patriarchs in Israel. Aaron should have been the one who was in charge. Moses was in charge. He wasn't, but it actually gives their date. Again, we're not getting into dating right now, but you can go back to the beginning and you can date the Bible. Very interesting that Usher did that. He puts this at about 1491 BC. That actually lines up with Daniel's 70th week. When you get down into the book of Daniel, the prophecy of 70 weeks, that date works out exactly to the cutting off of Messiah. Comes right down to it. 493 years. So what we got here, we've got his age. Now, verse number 8, the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, now, when Pharaoh shall speak unto you, he's going to say, show me a miracle for you. Why would he ask a miracle of a normal man? Men are not miracle workers. But see, he thinks that Moses is a god. He said, I want to see him do a miracle now. He has already accepted him in the position of deity. And I use God with a little g in quotation marks. I usually do that when I'm looking at it. But he said, I want you to show me a miracle, then thou shalt say unto Aaron. He said, when he says that, you're going to say unto Aaron, now take thy rod. Now we're going to stop with that this morning. What rod is that? That is Moses' rod. Aaron's going to take thy rod. You're going to find that rod is going to come into prominence a lot in the books of the Pentateuch. It's a thing of power. They deal with a rod. When Jesus comes upon the face of the earth in the millennium, he's going to rule and reign with a rod of iron. It's not talking about it's actually a steel rod. But that rod of iron means that it's going to be with an iron fist. You've heard people talk about somebody ruling with an iron fist. That doesn't mean they've got an iron fist. It just means that that thing's adamant. It's not going to bend. It's going to be able to take care of what it is. But now he's getting ready. He's going to come back. He's already been, Pharaoh said, not going to let him go. Turned up the burner. Put Israel in a mess. Now they're having to make stubble to make brick. And now, boy, everybody's mad at everybody. They're mad at Moses. Moses indicted God. God, listen, everybody's mad at everybody. But now he's going to turn the power up on him. Why? He's going to start multiplying. Heretofore he said something. Now he's going to start doing something. But I thank God that what he did was something very gentle. God doesn't start out with a 2-by-4. God doesn't do that. Even with us as his children, that still small voice on the inside of us. You ever heard that still small voice? Let me tell you, I know when God's talking to me. I've said that we are classic cases of schizophrenia. We are more, we talk to somebody that doesn't exist, and he talks back to us, and that, man, the world, they'd put us on medication, put us in an institution if they thought they could get away with it. That's just who we are. Small, still voice. Now, what he does, he starts with them with a small thing. Something that's not expensive. It does not cost Pharaoh one thing. He said, show me a miracle. He said, I'm going to show you a miracle. We're going to find out that his sorcerers could do the same thing. He said, that ain't nothing. Watch what ours do. But we're going to find out his eats theirs. Even in the things that we think we can do, God can do them better and more permanently when we work through his power. Good lesson in that. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we love you. We thank you for the day. I pray now, Father, that you bless the service to come. Give us a good day. Be with our people that are traveling. Give safety those that are out sick. I pray for them physically. Lord, we're looking forward to a good day today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.